We're going to pick up part 2 of the Rascals here in 1967. Now, the last I left you, the Rascals had been on a European tour, and Gene Cornish had mentioned that they had only been gone a number of weeks, but when they came back, they felt like the whole music industry had already started to change. And if you look at Top 40 of 1967, you'll notice this change in instrumentation and production values of music that brought in new instrumentation and just started doing different things with rock music. And the Rascals were ready to challenge some of the leaders at this time as well. For their next single, the Rascals had altered their sound completely. And, gone was the gritty guitar and that heavy Hammond organ sound and that high energy of them jumping around. This was traded for a much more mellow song, mellow tone, and this was the song Groovin. Now, the thing that's interesting about Groovin is that the sound was so different. Let me give you an example of the instrumentation. So Eddie and David are in backing vocals. They're doing the bird whistling. Gene is playing harmonica. Dino is on conga drum, and Felix is on piano. And this was such a drastic shift in their sound that Atlantic did not want them to release this record. They thought they would lose their audience.
Groovin on a Sunday afternoon.
So the band felt so strongly about Groovin that this is an example of the band's intuition, which was in perfect step with the times, was way out in front of where the record company's mind was at. So the intuition of the record company would have been completely wrong. Now, hedging their bets even further, the Rascals did a Spanish, French, and Italian versions of this song and released them in their respective markets. So Groovin gave the band their second #1 song, the first being Good Lovin'. So this you get your second #1 song, that kind of catapults you into another strata. You no longer have to do the cheap bus tours anymore. This happened with the Stones when they did Satisfaction to Get Off My Cloud, and the Byrds with Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn. So now the Rascals had their second #1. Now the next album, the third album called Groovin, featured a lot more originals by Felix and Eddie. And David Brigati did do some background singing on this album as well. Gene Cornish did some bass guitar, but Chuck Rainey, the session player, came in and helped out on bass. And they did a great string of original songs.
Oh, what a crazy feeling. You got my heart really. Somebody that loves somebody like you. A strange, exciting thing about you.
So the next hit was A Girl Like You, which was a top 10 hit, another original. If Atlantic thought Groovin didn't sound like them, the song How Can I Be Sure was really even a further step. That was also
They touch me but don't take me down.
So as you can hear, How Can I Be Sure was even more of a departure for their sound. It was a waltz, so that was kind of an odd song to be on in the top 10. But in top 10 it was, with great lyrics by Eddie Brigati with an assist on lyrics from his brother David. And with the song A Girl Like You, with the piano intro, this really signified the end of the heavy use of the Hammond organ. And Felix started to use different types of keyboards in the songs, and the Hammond wasn't as prominent. Now with fame comes problems, and with most bands they have to deal with the money, the fame, the adulation. In this case you've got a writing partner in Eddie Brigati and Felix Cavaliere. The other two weren't writing as much, although Gene did a couple songs per album. And on this particular album there was an issue with Gene Cornish's song I'm So Happy Now. Gene wanted to put that on a B-side. And he figured that, well, why don't we all get a shot at getting a song on a single? Because obviously you're going to make more money with especially if you're on the B-side of Groovin. And this is where there were a couple arguments came up. And Felix felt that because the writers were under such pressure to write, they should get the benefits of the songs on the singles. Publishing and the writing became an issue at this point, and Gene did get his way. That song did go out on a B-side.
I'm so happy now.
So here's the back of the album. And one notable thing is that the cover was designed by Dino Danelli. He did the art direction essentially. The illustration was done by Lynn Rubin. Danelli was an artist, so you'll see some of his artwork gracing some of the album covers. Now, one thing you hear countless times in just about every 60s band is poor management. Now, that's not really the case with the Rascals. They had pretty solid management. Sid Bernstein was a rarity. He was kind of a man of his word, and this worked to a fault. You know, an example of that is that the Rascals were invited to play the Monterey Pop Festival. They would have been the perfect band. They would have been almost a headlining spot. And Bernstein had them committed to a party that was, it was Henry Ford's niece coming out party in Michigan, in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And he would not break that commitment. So that ended up being a lousy show for them for other reasons, but that's an instance where the management didn't place them in a more prominent area that would really do good things for their career. So things still were going great for the Rascals here. They were headlining Madison Square Garden, no more package tours, and they started working on their next album, Once Upon a Dream. And the lead single from this album was a song called It's Wonderful, and this is the Rascals dipping into the psychedelic sound.
To be said, but it's all in your head. It's wonderful.
It was at this time that the Rascals reclaimed the original name, the Rascals. The Young Rascals name had been used in the first 3 albums, but by the 4th album, the record company had made arrangements to secure the name back as simply the Rascals, and from that point forward, that's how they were billed. So here's an example of Dino Danelli's artwork. This is a sculpture that he did, and it appears on both sides of the album. It's a gatefold, and then there's photos on the inside. Some like photo negatives, but somewhat of a lavish packaging. And this album, they continue to write their own material and really come up with some really great stuff. You will hear a little more psychedelic flourishes on this album, like in the song Sattva. David Brigati guests as a lead vocalist on the song Once Upon a Dream. And then you get some really great originals like Easy Rolling and Silly Girl.
Where there's a glow of life that makes the air smell sweet. It must go on. All fears have gone. My world is always exciting. Should be inviting you. It's just a special morning when I wake yawning and sun is shining. Maybe I'm trying too hard to win your love, and maybe it isn't there.
Now the song It's Wonderful missed the top 10, but still a decent hit. And they didn't really have a strong single from this album, even though it sold very well. So as 1968 began, the Rascals, the year 68, you know, if you look at 67 as the summer of love, 1968 was the year of revolt. And the Rascals realized that, you know, now that they were a bigger band, and they could make some rules of their own. So one of the rules was that they wouldn't play to any segregated audiences in the South, and that all of their shows, they had to have one black act on it. So that was one thing that they started to do. In the meantime, they were doing large tours, and they were starting to work on their next album, which was going to be a double album. The record label Atlantic said, well, let's do a greatest hits album. This is called Timepiece, the Rascals' Greatest Hits, and there was a non-LP single on here, It's a Beautiful Morning.
It's a beautiful morning.
Now this album was supposed to be just a quick filler, so they could get their next album out to the stores, and this became the biggest selling album of their career. So the Rascals didn't spend too much time trying to do psychedelic music. They went right into, as I mentioned, they were very conscious of the segregated audiences and things like that. So they did a song, a protest song called People Gotta Be Free. And this was a response that they wrote really to the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. It was released July 1st. Now the record company did not want to release this one either. They thought a white band shouldn't be singing about this. And they thought it might make some problems. Well, it didn't. The only problem is that it went to number one. They had to figure out what the follow-up was going to be.
All the world over so easy to see. People everywhere just wanna be free.
Now, People Gotta Be Free was banned in South Africa, predictably. And as the band delved into 1968 further, I had mentioned earlier how this was the year of revolt. Well, the band started to, because they had more success, they started living in their own places. Work became more like co-workers instead of this camaraderie where you have on the road. And we see this happen to bands time and time again. So some bands can deal with it well, others cannot. So the cohesiveness of 1965 was gone. And if you look at the guys at this part of the band, you have two guys, Felix and Eddie, that look more like the hippie guys, and Dino and Gene a little more straight-laced. And you can tell that by their dress, their facial hair. So there was a bit of a divide in the band, and obviously that went along the lines of the writers and the non-writers. So while the Greatest Hits album was right on the top of the charts and coming down the charts, the next album, Freedom Suite, was released. Somewhat of a lavish package, double album, foil cover here. The next single they released was Ray of Hope, and that was somewhat of a repeat. It was another protest song, or somewhat of a repeat of People Gotta Be Free. That only got to number 24. And the song after that, the single Heaven, that only got to number 39. Both Ray of Hope and Heaven sounded a little more formulaic. It didn't have the originality of some of the earlier singles, and they were concentrating more on civil rights.
I know a lot of people think like me, that this world could be a place that's filled with harmony. There's a place that's called hell. Don't you ever forget. Look around, see the wonderful world on the ground.
Now, case in point, that last song, Look Around, to me sounds rather formulaic and just not that interesting. I think that they put too much emphasis on trying to have message music. Now, the album tracks are a little bit different. You've got a song called Me and My Friends. There's an instrumental. This disc 2 is all instrumental. And my favorite song, there's only 3 songs on the whole second disc. Adrian's Birthday is a really good one. And my favorite song on this album, which is the vocal by Felix, called Of Course.
You can run around now, baby. Of course you can, now, baby. Me and my friends are gonna show what must be shown. Got together with one purpose in our mind.
Freedom Suite was released as a single disc in some countries, and in those countries they just lopped off the instrumental disc. If you're going to do a double album and do 15-minute long instrumental songs, I mean, obviously that's a band who might be getting a little full of themselves. There was talk of them doing a movie, being in a movie at this time. That never materialized. And there started to be a little bit of a rift between the writers, Felix and Eddie. Now, Felix was a more workmanlike writer. He was becoming somewhat prolific. Eddie was he wasn't as concerned with singles, and it was hard for him to continue to be a writer. He was writing more poetry that wasn't really accessible to this type of music. And Felix was really relying on him to come up with really quality lyrics to fit his music. And this started to not work so well together because Eddie wasn't able to deliver all the time, or at least at the speed that Felix wanted. Gene Cornish had said in his biography that these outside business things started to creep in, and the only time they really felt good is when they were playing live on stage, where they were free and they had that camaraderie. And I think that just happens if you're not, as bands grow and mature and all the fame and fortune comes, the one place where you can do your thing is live. And I think that's one of the things that messed up the Beatles. When they stopped playing together, they lost some of that camaraderie. At this stage of the game, the Rascals were starting to sell out bigger venues, but the problem was their hits were starting to fall off a little bit. Those last few singles were just barely getting to the top 20 and top 30. So their next album, which we're in early '69 here, is the album called C. Now this album also didn't chart as well, it hit number 45, but the lead single is the title track called C. And I think this is just a great song. This whole album is a return to guitar-based music, a lot of energy, and the song C has got some great guitar, great energetic vocals, it's got a dance break to it.
Love is really everywhere. To see it is to fly.
Now their next single is a song called Carry Me Back, and that hit number 26 on the charts. And it's energetic, but it doesn't really carry you back to their old melodies of their old singles.
Carry me back. Carry me back. Carry me back.
Now the C album is probably my favorite album by the Rascals, and one of my favorite songs on here is a song called Hold On. It's got grit and snarl, and it's got this really funky flavor to it.
Now hold on, I'll tell you in a minute. I've been thinking about life to live in. You sure looking fine, pretty woman. Temptation's about to get me. I can feel it in my heart.
It's just a chance I'm taking. I've got to look into your hand before you leave and go away.
What do we like? Stop the day. Life's sweet shadow makes the night his day. Brings me closer to you.
So Nubia is a jazz exercise that has violin in it, upright bass. Eddie gives one of his best backing vocal performances I've ever heard. So this song, along with C, Hold On, and some others on this album, show the band at their instrumental height. But things were starting to fall apart, and they were getting to the journey's end. Okay, I'm going to stop the video right here. Initially, I wanted to do this Rascals history in 2 videos, but it's going to take a third part to tell the story properly. So that'll be coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. Also, I do have links below in all my videos if you're interested in purchasing any of the music or any of my reference materials that I use for these videos. So if you do that, you support the artist and you support my channel. See you for part 3.